Yeah, so thank you, Brendan. I'll jump in and kind of give a bit of an intro to the
Excellent.
the webinar, the fun stuff. So yeah, thanks to Brendan, thanks to Pat, and Sophie for running through the formalities this afternoon, and thanks to everyone for coming along. And to those of you who are just joining us for the presentation now, welcome. My name is Chris Pockney, so I'm an ecologist with Biolinks Alliance. And yeah, I'm just going to introduce today's feature presentation. We've got a fascinating presentation all about the wonderful world of invertebrates, so their diversity, importance, how we survey them, and how you can get involved at home as well. I would just like to plug a couple of really good initiatives happening right now before we do get into it. So Bug Hunt are running a Bugs in My Backyard week. So they're encouraging everyone to get out in their backyard or around the property and use iNaturalist to catalogue the invertebrates that you can find at home. So that's a really great joint initiative from Invertebrates Australia, Invasive Species Council, and Australian Geographic. So to get people out documenting the diversity in their local area, and also as a way to keep an eye out for any potential invasive or pest species as well. Another really important thing that's happening at the moment in the world of inverts is Zoos Victoria's moth tracker. So it's a really important tool for tracking the annual migration of the bogong moths from Western Victoria up to the Alps each spring. So they're still on the move throughout a lot of the state. And if you think you might have seen a bogong moth, you can snap a photo, upload it to their moth tracker online, and it'll be reviewed by an expert and added to their map if it is indeed a bogong moth. So there should be links to both of those initiatives in the chat. So feel free to jump on those and look at those in your own time. Today's presentation is being recorded, so for everyone who's listening in, we would appreciate it if you can keep your cameras off and your microphones on mute throughout the presentation. Any questions that pop into your mind, we will get to Q&A after John and Cam have presented. So just pop them into the chat as we go, and we will get those to our presenters at the end. I would like to echo what both Brendan and Pat have touched on, and that is sort of the value of our funders, our donors, volunteers, and supporters. The monitoring work that we do, which includes a big component around invertebrates, is only possible thanks to these supporters. So to any of you here today, thank you for enabling us to do what we do, and it is really hugely appreciated. So we'll get into it. And today's presenters, you're going to hear from Biolinks Alliance's own Cam O'Mara about the invertebrate monitoring that we've been undertaking and what we've found so far. But first, we've got local legend John Walter from the Upper Campaspe Landcare Network to talk about the incredible invertebrate diversity found through our region and how easy it is to actually survey for invertebrates yourself, even at home. So over to you, John.
Okay, thanks, Chris, and thank you, everyone. Thanks for the opportunity to do a presentation to everyone today. I'm not sure about all delivering all of those things today, but certainly incredible diversity is a major thing. I was going to just have a quick look at the survey work that was undertaken by the Upper Campaspe Landcare Network. And that really increased my focus and my attention onto the world of insects. And along the way, I learned a few simple techniques that help to get a better understanding of the insect fauna around us. I'll show you some of the main groups of pollinating insects. Just flick through some slides with some pretty pickies to give you an understanding of the diversity. I will look at the diversity of species that have been recorded on just one single plant, again, just to highlight what can be found when you spend the time stopping and having a look. I have a video which will compare a European honeybee feeding on native flora alongside a little native Lacera glossum bee, and you will see and understand, I think, the differences, why our native bees are so much more important in the landscape. And we'll have a bit of a discussion around using light traps as a survey method and how you can do these sorts of things fairly simply yourself. So, why didn't that just, there we go, it worked that time. A lot of the insects that you'll see today can be found in the Insect Guide to Central Victoria, which is something that we produced as part of the project. Many of you may already have seen or got copies of this. If you don't, it is available from most of the local shires. You can also download it as a PDF from both Macedon and the City of Greater Bendigo. The pollinator project itself began in 2020 and started off with a series of seminars. And we then kicked off 2 years of actual field survey work. That was completed in 2021, 2022. And we started off with 55 sites. And you can see here, I don't know if you can see my mouse pointer, but from up near Reedsdale to south of Trentham, from near Lancefield into the Friars Ranges, we covered a whole host of sites, mostly private property, but some public land in amongst them as well. On each of these locations, we did 2 to 4 individual survey locations on a particular site. So you can imagine the number of surveys that were actually undertaken. We did a total of 6 sweep net surveys and 4 trap surveys. So you can see here some of our student helpers conducting a sweep net survey near Metcalfe. And that was a defined area was surveyed, insects were collected in that space. I collected, identified what flower species were they visiting, what flower resources were available within that space. With the trapping surveys, we use these traps here on the bottom left. You can see a yellow and a blue trap down there. They're a passive collection method. They were put out for 4 days at a time. And basically what you're doing there is gathering species that are lured to the trap, and it gives you an understanding of the overall biodiversity in a location. Whereas the sweep net survey provides information that shows a relationship between the flora species and the insect species. So you get a better quality of data. Wonderful methods, but incredibly time consuming. You can see every insect that is taken has to be pinned, identified, little labels written up, and that's a huge process. You can spend an enormous number of hours just in that. In one survey alone, I ended up pinning over 2,500 insects, which is just an astounding amount of work when you come to do it. We still haven't received the long promised analysis and reports from the science partners on the project, unfortunately. And I've still got something like 1,000 insects in my freezer from our final trap survey that need to be processed. But we did have a lot of successes. I mean, the publication I showed earlier was a really good indicator or a success of the project. But we had a large number of webinars and seminars, and that reached a big slice of our community. We distributed tens of thousands of plants across our survey site. The property owners and people who attended our webinars were given plants to put in their gardens to help build up the local habitat for insect life. And of course, we've got many thousands of records on our iNaturalist project now of pollinating insects. And I'll show you something a bit more about that a bit later on. We also reached out to thousands of people at the insect expos at Wood End. And there we focused mainly on trying to reach the children using the insect guide and insect quiz as tools to engage with the kids and try and build a positive feeling for the future. So currently, as a result of the project, I'm working on producing a guide to the local native bee species. And would you believe it? We've recorded almost 150 species so far of native bees. And there's just some examples of how that guide is going along at the moment. That's still probably 6 months at least away. It would be quicker if I stopped finding new species. That would make it a bit easier. And that's really the result of the surveys, but also my own other observation techniques, plus observations of our other pollinator hunters working in the project. I suppose next is, instead of doing all of that sweep net surveys and all the trapping and all the pinning and processing and so on, Here we've got probably my favorite method of observing pollinators. And this is one of the students at a macro photography workshop that I delivered as part of the project. Find a nice plant, find it with flowers, park yourself in front of it with a camera, and just see what happens in 10 or 15 minutes. And you'll be absolutely amazed. If you've chosen the right plant, you can see an enormous array of species coming past. There's no need to do all that sort of writing of labels or anything like that. But you do need to be quick with your camera. Some days you won't find much. Some plants will be better than others, but it only takes 10 minutes. If you haven't found anything after 10 minutes, find another plant. And you can see here we're looking at garden plants. It doesn't have to be native flora. You can do this in gardens. You can do this in bushland. You can do this anywhere. So I'll show you a few more of the local bees. You can see we've got a couple of hairy species down the bottom. These ones obviously carry the pollen on their body. The ones across the top, in different genera and different families, ingest the pollen and transport it that way. So pretty much all of our native bee species are solitary. So only the females will collect the pollen, and they collect the pollen and the nectar, take that back to their nest location, and they make a little provision. They make up a paste of pollen and nectar, lay an egg on that, seal it off, and then start building another provision, lay an egg on that, and so on in their nest. Most of them are ground nesting, with some others nesting in borer holes, so on in trees or in old canes, in grass tree stems, and so on. A range of nesting sites. Hose reels is another one I've seen. The males don't really participate in this process. The males feed on the nectar on the plants, but they don't do any pollen collection whatsoever. And you'll see the males have less hair on their body. They're basically doing what this guy up here is doing, and he's sitting on a flower waiting and watching for females to fly past. Some of the bees are generalist species, and they will feed on pretty much everything. And others like this one are really specialized. So this is one of the so-called teddy bear bees, related to the same genus as the blue-banded bee. This was first identified in 1951, this species, and pretty much wasn't seen for 50 odd years. Really, the reason it wasn't seen is nobody was looking in the right places. Because it specializes on the flowers of the box mistletoe, you won't see it unless you are specifically looking at box mistletoe in flower. And first you have to find box mistletoe that's somewhere approaching ground level so you can see, because you're not going to find them up in the treetops. But it turns out these guys are everywhere. When I went out looking, I think I went to 8 sites on the first day, and I found these bees at 7 of them. So they are all over the place. You just need to know where to look. Another example of a specialist, this is a little Aeroproctus species. It's specially adapted to pollinate and work with the Petunia flowers, in this case our local Petunia rigida. You see in this back photograph here, it's got a shiny flat patch on its forehead. That allows it to push its head down here between the stamens and have its tongue then reach the nectar, which is right down the bottom of the flower here. And most other bee species are unable to access the nectar. So it's specifically redesigned its body to be able to access and utilize that resource. Other pollinators, we've got wasps, of course, lots and lots of wasps. Something I didn't mention earlier, but bees are actually evolved from wasps, and arguably you could say that bees are really wasps that have turned vegetarian. So the bees will use the nectar and pollen as the provision for their larvae, whereas a wasp uses meat. It catches bees, flies, beetles, spiders, other things, and that becomes the food resource for the larva of the wasp. But they, as adults, feed on nectar on the flowers in many cases, many species. And whilst they're not as hairy as a bee, they are also very good and common pollinators. Some of them, like the thinid wasps, and you see here is a female thinid, and this is the male of the same species here on the top right. You probably know this as a blue ant and say, well, what on earth's an ant doing here? Well, it's not an ant, it's actually a wasp. Um, and these females, once the mating is over, the female will return and burrow underground and locate and lay its eggs on things like mole crickets. Some of the other thinid wasps you see here, the females all wingless in this group of wasps. The male has little claspers, carries the female to the plant. They both have a nice rich nectar feed. Mating occurs, and then the female is released and goes on to find the right location to lay her eggs. Another group of wasps, and you can see here carrying pollen. These guys are sand wasps. They look pretty aggressive and pretty nasty. They're fairly large. They're probably, oh, I don't know, 12 mil, maybe 12, 13, 14 millimeters long in some cases. There's actually 4 species shown here. You can see subtle differences in the pattern, which helps you identify the different species. They look very aggressive, but they're actually fairly shy. And if you're standing at a flower at a bush trying to photograph them, they'll often be on the other side of the bush. And it takes a long time for them to become comfortable enough with your presence that they come around and allow you to get at them to photograph them. They are reported to become aggressive if you were to disturb their nest, and I'm told they have a very serious bite, but sting, but I've not fortunately not been caught by that. Flies, really super important pollinator. In some people would actually suggest that flies are more important than bees. They do an enormous amount of our pollination services. Not so many of these guys. These are things that you'll find when you start looking. This guy's particularly interesting, a tangle vein fly. So he acts like a hummingbird. He can hover in front of flowers whilst he's feeding on the nectar. But these are your more general species that you'll find looking at flowers, and you can see lots of different colors, lots of interesting eye patterns also available, which all helps you with the identification process. Our particular green-eyed friend here is actually a march fly, but not one that's going to attack you and suck your blood. It's purely a nectar-feeding march fly. A few more variations. You can see the diversity of flies. Once you stop and look at the flowers and start to record what's there, the diversity is really quite amazing. These are all so-called bee flies. Apparently they look a lot like bees. Perhaps they might look like the European bumblebees. That might be where the name has come from. But as a group of flies, they are feeders on pollinators as adults, very hairy, very good at transporting pollen. But you also see these guys hovering and flying slowly just a few inches above the ground, often in bare soil areas. And what they're actually doing there is they're looking for the nesting sites of beetles and other flies and other insects, because they lay their eggs on the larvae of other insects, which then becomes food plant for these guys. But they are great pollinators. Last of our flies, just an opportunity to talk about things like wings and wing patterns. A couple on the left, you'll see there's some quite intricate patterning in the wings. Again, this helps you identify the species. But also with all insects, really, the wing veins and the pattern of the wing veins is a very important feature as well. And that helps you determine family, genus, and so on. And if you're photographing insects and putting them up on iNaturalist, it's really useful if you can include 1 or 2 photographs that show you the pattern of the veins on the wings as well, and that'll help people to identify your species. Beetles. What do we say about beetles? One little snippet of information I keep being told is 1/4 of all animal fauna in the world are beetles. Sounds like a pretty astounding number to me. Australia, I know, has over 30,000 species. And any good flowering plant will probably have a range of species of beetles feeding on the flowers. and again acting as pollinators. Once you start searching around, you'll find a lot of these leaf beetles, and they're not necessarily pollinators, but they're very colourful beetles that you just can't help but find once you start looking closely at what's on the bushes. This particular one down the bottom is quite specific. You'll only see that on Acacia aspera, local acacia plant, but wonderful colourful beetles, and well worth spending the time to photograph if you spot them. These ones, again, very, very colourful species. These are the jewel beetles, and they are very active pollinators and always found feeding on flowers as adults. The larvae will be, they're a borer in other plants. You won't find the larvae as a borer in the same plant as what the adults feed on. So, for example, this species will feed on Calatrix or tea tree, and that's often the sort of groups where they'll feed. They won't feed on any flower. There's only certain species that they'll feed on. And we can't talk pollinators without looking at butterflies. I'm sure some of you already know, but 4 of the species shown here display what's called hilltopping behaviour. That's where the males will all stake out a territory on the local high point or local hill, and the females in the meantime will be probably down in the gullies and under the forest and feeding on flowers. And when it becomes mating time, the first thing the female needs to work out is, well, where are the boys? Now in our world we might call past the local pub or some other such place, but for these butterflies, all they have to do is go and find the local high point, and there's a selection of males waiting for them and showing off their displays in their territory. The background images that I've been using here are all taken on some of the properties that we've been surveying as part of our pollinator surveys. And like, I was pretty amazed in this particular one, there's silver birch, this grove of silver birch on a property near Newbury. And I was driving out on the property one day, and there were 6 deer which had escaped from a neighbouring farm, were wandering through under the silver birch, which sort of made me pause and think which continent I was on for a moment. But these ones, these 2 on our left are both azure butterflies, and really that's something else that would be rarely seen, because I only found these species when I was looking for the teddy bear bee earlier. Like the teddy bear bee, these specialise in the flowers of the mistletoe, and it's only by looking at the mistletoe that you'll see them. Not very colourful butterflies until they lift their forewings up and show their little beautiful azure colours, the little flashes of colour. Oops, sorry, I just went the wrong way there. So that's really enough of example of pollinators, but just quickly look at what one plant can produce. So on my property, the prickly tea tree is probably the most amazing plant, and it's not unusual for me in late summer or midsummer. So between the middle of December to mid-January, this thing flowers for about 2 weeks. The time varies from year to year. And during that 2 weeks, I would probably spend several hours every day standing in front of this bush with my camera. And as you can see, there are 108 species, 40 different native bee species and so on, all recorded on just one bush. I live in rural, I'm not in a suburban situation, and I've got bushland nearby and lots of native vegetation around. So that certainly does help. This is a little video, and it only goes for a couple of minutes. I might hurry it along, but I put this in really to... Oh, we've got sound. That's good. Excuse the sound of the cars driving past. Here's a little native Lasioglossum. You can see it has a very deliberate action when it comes to feed on the potilobium flowers here, little native pea. Each flower it comes to, it lands on the flower on the wing petals, It's very hard to track these things with the camera when you're doing it. And you see it pushes down with its hind legs and exposes the anthers, and it's actively collecting the pollen there every time it feeds, and it will do this on every flower that it visits. Not just this species, I've found different species and different genera will all have this same action when it comes to working on flowers, on pea flowers. And what it was doing there was raking the pollen up with its forelegs and then packing it all away. We'll just skip through a little bit here. Again, you can see it raking the pollen there up off the anthers. So it's perfectly adapted to working with and pollinating the flowers. Don't you love its little yellow pajamas? In just a moment, we'll see. Oops, sorry, I didn't mean to do that. In just a moment, we'll see the honeybee. And just make a comparison of how the honeybee approaches the flowers. It doesn't have a system. It lands on the flower in whatever form. There you see it's on the standard, it's upside down. It's no way is it ever going to expose the anthers in that situation. But it's very adept at taking the nectar. And this is part of the issue with honeybees in our landscape. Whilst they can take the nectar and deprive the native fauna of a food resource, they're not providing a pollination service in return like the native species are. It also seems far more clumsy to me in its flight patterns when you compare it to the natives. And I suppose that's the question there. Which bee do you think is pollinating our wildflowers? So moving on from that, just a little brief section on using light sheet surveys before I hand over to Cameron. This is the setup that I use when I'm doing a light sheet survey for myself, or I do these things for groups and have done it for schools and so on. I use two lights because this is a system that's used by Biolinks Alliance at Spring Plains. So Biolinks Alliance has the lights and the battery packs, and I provided the rest of the gear. When we're using it at Spring Plains, we set up one sheet in the trial zone and one sheet in the control area. Cam will get on one with his camera, I'll get on the other, and we'll record simultaneously what's happening in the two areas. Someone has to look after these when we're not in use at Spring Plains, and I suppose I volunteered for the fringe benefits of using them at my own time as well. That's what the lights are like when they're on. Different coloured lights and also a UV light component. And setting all this up, it can produce some amazing results. Not all insect groups are attracted to the lights, and not all species in a group are attracted, but you can get some pretty good results on a light sheet. So just as a little example, and I haven't got my numbers in front of me, on this particular image, I can tell you there's 264 insects in that image, covering 72 different species. And that's a pretty good result. You don't often get a sheet as busy as that. It's wonderful when you do, and you can see in there quite a lot of diversity of species. What you sometimes get and don't want is a sheet that looks like this one. And this was 2 weeks ago. I was up in the Mallee. I estimate that I had 20,000 plus insects on the sheets on that particular night. I did another light sheet in a different area. This was west of Red Cliffs. I did another one to the south of Red Cliffs the following night, and I had another 20,000 species on that light sheet, but they were different species. Here, the main species are non-biting midges, plus a wide range of others, probably 19,000 non-biting midges and 1,000 other species. And in the other one, the following night, I probably had 19,000 little rove beetles and 1,000 other species. It's very difficult to isolate and photograph a species because what I'm trying to do on a survey like this is I want to photograph and record not every individual, but every species that's on the light sheet. And if you spot something that's new on that mass and you're about to photograph it and it flies away, how do you find it again? It can be a very difficult process. Of course, the things that you get are moths. And I'll just talk here just briefly about the light sheet survey often involves expensive equipment. Cam will cover that a bit more later, but it doesn't have to. All these photos here with this painted background or the glass, these were taken on the walls of my house. And when I first got the camera and I could take photographs of things at night, all I did was turn the lights on in the house and I'd walk around with my camera and photograph what was on the walls. And what was the result? 400 species of moths on the walls of my house that I recorded in just over a year. And that blew my mind. That was astounding to me as that the diversity could be so high. This little one down here, this is there as a reminder that not all moths are night flying. There are quite a lot of day flying moths and pollinator species on flowers. Other things that you'll get coming along, you will get different fly species, including a bee fly, as this one over here. Beetles, you'll get a range of beetles. You might get 10, 12, 14 species of beetles, ranging from little beetles from 1.5 to 2 mil in size through to 25 mil, 28 mil monsters. Wasps, you'll always have a range of wasps coming and visiting the light sheet, again varying in size. One of my, I suppose, the groups that I'm not more interested, more excited to find because of their wonderful colours and shapes, and that's things like the little leaf hoppers and psyllids and those sorts of things. You know, these guys are only a few millimetres in length, and they're really quite often quite intricate patterns and styles. They're really quite worth seeing. And the last little group I was going to show you is just things like some katydids. This particular one here on the left, this was recorded at a light sheet in Seymour, and 2 weeks later I recorded another one at Crosby Nature Conservation Reserve just north of Heathcote. So that species had not been recorded in Victoria previously. And it's not unusual that you find that sort of stuff. When you're doing this sort of looking, it's not unusual to find an unnamed species or a previously unrecorded species locally. That's simply because there hasn't been enough study done. It's actually believed or thought now that this is a species new to science. It's slightly different from the species found in Northern Australia, and the experts suspect it's a different species. You get other groups like, you know, ants, mayflies, lacewings, caddisflies, mantids, spiders, all sorts of other things coming along. That's sort of pretty much me. But if you are out there and you are taking photographs and have an interest in this, if you're in that area of Central Victoria, think about joining our Pollinator Hunters project on iNaturalist, and if you join, whatever you post on there will become information that's accessible to us to use in our study. And that's me. Thank you.
All right, thanks, John. Can everyone see and hear me all right? So I'm just going to sort of follow on from a lot of what John has already spoken about. And if you are so inclined to have 10,000 bugs flying around your face at midnight for several hours a few times a year, as John and I seem to be, you can do this yourself, basically. So there's a few different ways you can do it. The setup is really, really simple. It can be as cheap as buying some DJ lights that have UV spectrum on them, or fluorescent lights that do the same. Generally, UV lights are the only ones that can run off battery packs, like these ones that you can see here, which you can get quite cheaply. It just depends on the milliamp hours that you get on those batteries determines how long you can spend out there and how long you can survey for. But the sort of the golden standard for research is these LEPI LEDs, which is made by a guy over in Europe. So they cost a bit of money to get over here, but they're really compact and they last for hours, and they've got the full spectrum design to attract as many invertebrates as possible. And then you string it up between two trees and yeah, keep it slightly proud of the sheet and just monitor both sides starting from when sun sets basically. But yeah, make sure you get yourself some UV glasses as well, because you are spending a lot of time around a lamp that can damage your eyes. And so here's another setup. So this is from Anto Supplies, so an Australian brand that sells a lot of these tools that you can access. Slightly less portable than the previous setup. You need a small lead acid battery, 12-volt battery, and something to be able to charge the battery as well. This is a specific net that actually just traps the invertebrates. Some of them fly to the outside of it, but a lot of the time they'll try to climb down in through this funnel and then be trapped in there, so you can actually capture the insects and invertebrates and monitor them off-site as well, if that's what you're trying to achieve. And another alternative, similar to what John mentioned with his fluorescent light on the outside of his house, is having a setup with a bulb, either an LED bulb or a fluorescent bulb. There's also what are they, mercury lamps, but they require even more setup, and they need a very special device to be able to run them off mains power. So yeah, this is a very cheap but very immobile setup. So you have to be near power or a generator to get those to work. So I was going to go into a little bit of detail as well about, John's spoken a little bit about specialist invertebrates, and I'm going to talk about specialist flowers. So both of these things go hand in hand. So specialist flowers are flowers that plants produce fewer flowers per season. They're generally trying to go for specific insect species, and they're only pollinated by those species so that they are more targeted in a way that their pollen is being spread around between the individuals in that species. So that way they can do things like hormone mimicry for certain wasps, which attracts those wasps in, and they know that those wasps are only going to those species because they're the only ones producing that hormone that's attracting in that exact type of wasp. And there's many orchids that have, you know, a relationship with just the one species, and that's it. And they've been co-evolving for a very, very long time, basically. And generally they produce fewer flowers, and yeah, not as much nectar. And some produce no nectar at all, and they're just purely tricking these wasps into thinking that they're mating with another wasp, when in fact they're just being used by these orchids or other flowering species. So generally more difficult to get nectar out of, and yeah, more specialized, I suppose. And then there's the generalists. So these are things like eucalyptus flowers, and any other type of flower. Asteraceae flowers are in this category too. Things that they're going for the shotgun approach. They just want as many pollinators to come to them as possible. They want the most number of they figure if there's lots of insects coming to all the plants all the time, all the flowers all the time, then eventually something's going to get pollinated. So yeah, examples of eucalypts and daisies basically. So they're visited quite a lot by bees, flies, beetles, butterflies, things like that. So yeah, produce a lot of nectar as well. So what does that mean? So why is it important to have a lot of diversity of different types of flowers that are specialists and generalists? Well, if you have a lot of generalists, then you're producing a lot of flowers. So you have more flowers in the area, and that is what this chart is showing here. The number of flowers that you have increases the number of insect species that you're getting quite dramatically. You can see that trend line sort of goes up quite steeply in that graph there. This is from 2024 study. And then over here, this is number of flowering plant species. So that's the number of species of different flowering plants that you have also increases the number of insect species that you have in a given area. So both of those factors are really important, and it's why you need not only the generalist species that really that produce a lot of nectar and a lot of flower, they bring a lot of invertebrates in, but you need the specialists as well, because then if you only use generalists, then you're only getting up around this sort of area. But then if you keep going and bringing in more species and more diversity, then you can keep that number of local invertebrates populations skyrocketing and species diversity skyrocketing. This is another study from 2005 that shows a very similar trend. Basically, the abundance of pollinators and the richness of pollinators, and therefore the diversity of pollinators, goes up significantly in line with the richness of flowering species in a given area. So this is a typical box ironbark forest on the left here. So this is at Pilcher's Bridge. So this has been cleared and probably several times. Really dense canopy, almost no mid-story, just completely bare earth with a few sticks and twigs and leaves and not much else. And then on the right here is an area near Bendigo Regional Park, which I've misspelled Bendigo down there, but never mind that, where you can see diverse understory and midstory of flowering shrubs and plants. So I think it's pretty clear, you could see from that which would be able to sustain a more diverse population of different species of invertebrates, and therefore different, higher up in the food web species that depend on insects for food and all the other resources that insects bring to the ecosystem. So yeah, it's pretty clear that a lot of the things that we're missing from these landscapes is a lot of these species are now gone, and it takes a very long time for those species to come back. And one of the big problems is that these sites on the left, the soil has been so depleted over the many years that it's been like this, that it's incredibly difficult to come back to this place. So one of the things that BioLinks is trying to do is figure out ways that we can get them to speed up the process of returning from this to something more like this. Yeah. So in order to do that, anyone, anywhere you are, no matter if you live in the 7th story of an apartment building in Melbourne, or you live in rural Victoria, there's always things that you can do. And there are some amazing guides out there. This is by Wenabee Foundation. And they've basically put together a guide on species that you can plant. Species that you can plant, when you plant them, the height that they reach, the color, the time of year that they flower, and critically, on the far right-hand side here, the visitation by pollinator. So what you're trying to do when you look at a graph like this is you're trying to figure out which ones, how can I get the most diverse range of different pollinators coming to the area that I'm in. And it doesn't matter if you're just working in a planter box that's 1 meter by 10 centimeters. You can get things planted and going in the tiniest of spaces, and pollinators will come. So the more people doing it, the better. Dig up your lawn, turn your lawn over and turn it into something that's more like a beautiful wildflower meadow. These species are very easy to establish a lot of the time, and they're just waiting for space to grow in, and find out which are the generalists and work with those first, because they're generally more hardy, easier to establish than the specialists, and start from there and sort of build it up over time is the best way to go about it. And like John said earlier, with things like eucalyptus trees, having a diversity of eucalyptus trees means that you're covering more of the flowering periods that you're trying to achieve. So having the longest chain of flowering periods is also really important. Flowers all throughout the year is what you want. And then so John's also spoken about the blue and yellow vein insect traps. So these don't work using chemicals at all. They're just the insects are attracted by the color of the different traps. So that they fly in, they think they're landing on a flower, they crawl into this little tub down here, and then we come along, unscrew the lid, and pop another lid on and take it away, and then we count all of the find and catalog them, which you can see I was doing there on my kitchen table to my partner's disgust. And there's another option that you can do there, which is just the dish method, which is much cheaper, easier to access, and it's basically just colored pans with either alcohol or dish soap in them, and the bees or insects just come and they land in those, and then you collect them and measure the abundance and diversity of whatever comes in and lands in them. So very easy, very cheap. The only problem with it obviously is that you're removing some pollinators from the system. So you need to know that the research that you're undertaking is outweighing the impact that you're having on those populations. So only do it if you think it's worthwhile. And yeah, one of the beautiful things is we don't need research permits to do this stuff, but it still means we need to do our due diligence in terms of ethics and making sure that we're not doing more harm than good, I suppose. Yeah, so final image there, you can see on the left, that's a native bee on a fennel. And to reiterate a point that John made earlier, you know, native animals will use introduced species. So that's at my partner's vegetable farm. You can see that I have found a crazy number of native bees on our fennel patch a couple of years ago. And then on the right, you can see another native bee on a leucopogon with those beautiful little hairy petals, which are fantastic at aiding pollination. So yeah, another adaptation that flowers have come up with. And at the end of the day, all of these adaptations, that it's just an evolutionary arms race between insects and flowers to try and get plants to breed with each other. And it's this incredibly complicated and incredible diversity of flowers and insects that's come from these amazing plants that have decided to grow flowers, which is, it's just a phenomenal thing when you think about it. But I suppose I'll throw it back to Chris now for questions.
Amazing. Thanks, John. Thanks, Cam. While we wait for some questions to come into the chat, I guess, Cam, do you want to quickly touch on, if you've got it off the top of your head or on hand, some of the findings that we're getting from Spring Plains in the invertebrate space?
Yeah, so we've found very interesting results and very preliminary results in the treatment and the control sites at Spring Plains. After the first year of monitoring since the interventions, Peters Gully, which was the treatment site, we saw a rise in the number of aquatic dependent larval stage species compared to the control site, which indicates that there may have been more moisture content in that ecosystem, in that catchment, for those species to be able to, reach adulthood, which could potentially point towards the fact that all those ponds that we put in meant that water was able to stay in the landscape for a little bit longer than it was previously, and it sort of extended that range for those species to be able to reach adulthood. And we've also just noticed an increase in diversity generally. So the diversity of insects has gone up in the treatment site. And so one of the factors that we think might be contributing to that is the fact that we've introduced all of this woody material across the site has led to these sort of microclimatic conditions and protected a lot of the ground flora species that a lot of the time either get trampled by kangaroos or just chewed out by wallabies and things like that. So we've essentially created a bit of, structural diversity on the ground with all of these little microclimates around the crowns of the trees that are now on the ground that allow things like paper daisies and stuff to exist for longer in the landscape as well. So yeah, there's all of these interesting results that we're starting to see. There's still a lot of data to crunch, and we're always collecting more. So I look forward to a time when I'm not so busy that I can actually sit down and get my teeth sunk into those data and find more results, which will, yeah, be coming soon, I hope.
That's the dream, isn't it? Find that time.
Yeah.
I guess I'll throw it to both of you. You've obviously touched on, planting, whether native or not, flowering plants as a really key action that any of us can do to encourage a diversity of pollinators. Is there any other key actions that really stick out to either of you that we can do or that land managers should be doing to encourage greater, I guess, diversity and abundance of our native invertebrates in particular?
Do you want to take it, John, or?
Well, yeah, I'm just thinking of it depends on the property, I suppose. Connectivity is always important. So pollinators, most pollinator species don't fly great distances. So connectivity within the landscape is really important to allow them to move across and move into new areas. So always having that, and really the primary thing is, and I'm sorry, Cam, I forgot to mention. I think you referred to me talking about the eucalypts, which I was going to do, but I actually skipped over it. I was suggesting that you don't plant one eucalypt species, you plant 5 or 6. That way you're extending that whole planting flowering time over a much greater portion of the year. And then you make sure you have your mid-story, make sure you have some grasses, which are larval food plants for a lot of insects. A whole host of species are needed to increase that diversity. And that's probably the best thing you can do, is to do that, but also resist, same things as for any species and diversity, really, resist the need to clean up. Nesting sites for bees, most native bees are ground nesting, and often they want the right soil composition, the right aspect, but also some bare soil. So not everything has to be covered. If you're in a small patch, leave a metre or two of east facing soil, sort of a sandy sort of a soil, that the bees can nest in, or put substitute nesting in, such as bee hotels. You need to be a bit careful. A lot of the commercial bee hotels are really not suitable. They might be fine to sell in Bunnings, but the depth of the hole is really important to getting the right mix of the sexes. So bees and wasps have the ability to choose which eggs are fertilized, which ones are not. And a fertilized egg will result in a female, and an unfertilized egg will produce a male. What generally happens is a bee will, the first couple of provisions it makes will be female, then it'll not fertilize some eggs and have males. Males emerge first, fly around, battle each other, waiting for the females to emerge, and then the survivors are the ones who end up mating with the females when they emerge from the nest. If that hole is too short, you get a differential in the sex ratio, and that will have impacts on the population long term. But as I say, I think it's close on 80%, I think is the number from memory, of bees nest in the ground. So that bare soil is probably more important than drilled pieces of wood in the landscape, but both will provide benefit. I'm not sure if that answered the question or not.
Yeah, that's great. That was a couple of good tips in there. I guess the only last question I'll throw at you, unless something else pops up in the chat, is we've obviously, understandably focused a lot on pollinators and obviously the benefits that we all see from those species day to day. But I guess if both of you or either of you want to touch on, the other benefits that our invertebrates bring to, to ecosystems and things that we kind of value day to day beyond just pollination.
I'll bring up a slide that I didn't bring up earlier to sort of help make this point. But this shows the various orders of
And we can't see your screen anymore.
Oh, you can't?
Yeah.
No, it's back on.
Now it's gone.
How's that?
Loading.
There we go.
Yeah.
That's on.
So these are the various the most common orders of invertebrates, terrestrial invertebrates anyway, in Australia. These are the described versus the estimated number of species that we have in Australia. And to Chris's point, it's many of these species we don't know what they are. They're all up around the 20 to 50% range of the species that we actually know and have described and are understood to science and to entomologists to exist. And most of the species that are going extinct, and it's estimated that it's around 1 to 3 species going extinct per week in Australia. Most of those are species that we haven't described. So they're sort of ghosts. They're called ghost extinctions, basically, because they're just happening and we know they're happening, but we can't really account for them in any real way. But all of these things play really different critical roles in the ecosystem. And then within each of these orders, there's so many different families and genera that all play wildly different roles in the ecosystem as well. Hemiptera alone, the true bugs, which I'm sure John can talk about, they fill an incredibly wide array of niches, from just pure nectar feeders to sapsuckers to, all of these different these roles that they play. And, some of them are predatory and things like that. So every single one of these is incredibly important to the function of every ecosystem in the world, basically. So I don't know if you want to say more, John.
And it's interesting when you're doing a survey or a light sheet. I've done light sheets in the same location on successive nights, and I've got 30-40% species difference from one night to the other. So the variation on the weather, the wind, what the moon was like, all these things are factors. So you're only ever getting a little bit of a small snapshot of what's in the landscape on any individual survey. The diversity is just so great. And it's such beetles and beetle larvae can be involved as part of the decomposition process of wood. They've got a whole host of other services that insects are providing, aside from one of the key services, of course, is being food for other animals as you move up the food chain. By looking after things like, and I'll step in and say fungi and so on as well, but looking after things like the fungi, the lower plants and the insects, focusing your attention on those, the benefits become really, really widespread because it works up the tree all the way.
Great. Thank you both. Really informative presentation. I'm sure everyone got a lot out of it and particularly loved all of the imagery you both used as well. So thank you. If you did join late, this has been recorded and will be distributed in the coming weeks. So feel free to share it amongst your networks as well. But that's it for the presentation, and I'll hand back to Sophie now to wrap us up.
Thanks, Cam and John, for absolutely brilliant presentation. Just makes you realise just how little we know about the world that's out there and how wondrous it is. Really inspiring, and thank you both very much. John, the work you've done with Upper Campaspe Landcare Network has just been marvellous, and you know, it's great that we're able to share it across our broader network, and I hope we can do more of that in the year to come. So thanks everybody for joining us. Thanks for your support over the year, and really looking forward to the year ahead, and continuing to work with you, expanding our projects, expanding our partnerships, and doing a whole lot more. So lots of ways to be involved. If you're not, imagine most of you are signed up to our e-news. Our program events is only going to grow with our new projects, so plenty of ways to be involved through those. Please feel free to share our annual report with anyone who you think might be interested in it this year. The more people we get joining us, the more of a difference we can all make. And yeah, so thanks again for a great year, and for joining us today. Brendan, have you got any other final words, or should we wrap up now?
Oh, well, let's wrap up. That was tremendous. Thank you. And as someone who tries to take photos of insects myself, I'm just in awe of John and how much work he does and the quality of his photographs and things. So it was great. Thank you.